Welcome to another episode of the Strength Log. My name is Philip Wildenstam. I'm a co-founder of Strength Log and a certified nutrition coach.
And I'm Daniel Richter, CEO of Strength Log and a certified personal trainer. And a certified squatter.
Yeah, you are, buddy. You've been squatting a lot lately.
Yes, I have been doing. It's consumed my training in the almost this whole year. I'm currently on the third cycle of our squat specialization program, Squat Samba. Those are only 6 weeks per cycle, but I've been squatting before those as well.
I'd love to see it. I know that you have it was a long-term goal, but it's turning into a short-term goal of hitting a 200 kilo squat.
Exactly. So for those of you who listened a while back, I did the first cycle, obviously a couple of months back, with a goal of maybe getting 200 kilos at the end of that cycle, but I was open to having to do many of them. I followed Squat Samba with an entered 1 rep max of 180 kilos, which was around where I was. And then after 6 weeks, I was really close to getting 200 kilos. I got 190 kilos, but not 200. 190 is still my PR.
Yeah.
Then I did another 6 weeks, and I was slightly further away from 200 kilos. I wasn't as strong after that time period, at that day at least, that I was 6 weeks earlier, even though I had trained the program with 5 kilos more, so 185 as an entered max. And now I'm currently training it with 187.5 kilos as my entered 1 rep max. But now that I've been thinking about it, I think that based on the training I had done before the 200 attempt and how close I was, I think that I had a very good day that day. And then, even though I could train with 5 kilos more in the subsequent cycle and felt stronger, I think I might have had a bad day at that attempt.
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah, it is.
Finding the correct day to try your max. I just want to add to the listeners that I've seen both videos from both cycles, and you were close both times.
But closer. I think I was like 5 kilos weaker than my second attempt.
Yeah, maybe.
Even though my baseline strength was definitely higher. And I just did week 2 workout 1 yesterday. And I felt, even in that workout, like I am so much stronger now than I was 10, 14 weeks ago. So yeah, we'll see. I'll, if nothing unexpected happens, I'll finish this cycle and do a third attempt.
Don't drop too much body weight.
Yeah, that's it. It's summertime, sun's out, guns out.
You're always chasing the influencer dream.
Yeah.
Abs. Yeah. Abs are overrated, Daniel.
But that's enough on my squat. We're gonna talk about the squat in general in this episode. We're continuing our series on the big 6 that we've coined them. Pushing, pulling, squatting, hip hinging, and double up on the pushing and pulling for horizontal and vertical. So last week we spoke about the bench press with a lot of detail, and today we're going to do the same thing with the squat.
And we titled this episode King of Lifts or King of Exercises or something, question mark.
Exactly.
Do you believe that, Daniel?
Kinda, sorta, maybe.
Yeah.
Because what I first want to get out there is that just like with the bench press episode, we are gonna hone in on the barbell back squat in this episode, but really the episode is on the squat movement in general. Yeah. So even if you are interested in training the squat with a kettlebell, doing goblet squats, or you're doing leg presses, or maybe even lunges, our goal is that this episode will have you understand the squat movement much better. Yeah. And then you can use that for your favorite blend of squatting. But the barbell back squat is the most popular squat exercise, so that is why we are focusing in on that.
And it's the second most popular exercise in our free workout tracker app, Strength Log.
Exactly. Bench press is number 1. Squat comes right after on place number 2.
So not a lot of people actually skip leg day. They just joke about skipping it.
Yeah, at least not the users of our app.
Good users.
So we talked about some of my squatting experiences, but you should also mention your squat history.
Yeah, I'm still pissed about that one. The squat used to be my absolute favorite lift. I started squatting after 2 knee surgeries just to get back in shape. It was part of my rehab program.
And I think we should point out that those knee surgeries, they were not related to lifting.
No, they were American football related as a teenager.
Yeah.
But I'm still paying for that. I became a competitive powerlifter. The squat was by far my best lift. I did my last competition. I did 606 pounds, 275 kilos, and that felt easy. It was just a warm-up competition for the next one.
Yeah, that's right. You were planning to do this as a practice run.
Yeah, I hadn't competed in several years, and I was like, finally time for my comeback. I'm gonna reach the qualifying limit for the Swedish Championship, which was at the moment I think like 40 kilos more than what I did in the comeback competition. So except for my bench press, both the deadlift and the squat felt quite easy that competition. But it proved to be my last competition because now I can't even squat anymore. My wife is bugging me about doing another knee surgery because I can barely bend my left leg. And she's like, talk to your doctor. And I'm like, I hate doctors.
I'm a man and I will handle this like a man.
Exactly. No, but I was aiming for a 300 kilo squat, and I think I would have gotten there, which is easy for me to say right now, but everything was pointing up.
Yeah, I don't know. I might do a 300 kilo squat after this squat samba cycle.
Yeah, who knows, man. I would love to see you trying it in your garage alone.
I would not love that. Yeah. Okay, so we have been training the squat a lot, and like even for me, even though the squat never really has loved me back, it's been my favorite lift throughout my entire lifting career, based to a large extent just because I think the squat is a very good exercise for the human body.
Yeah.
I might sometimes think that maybe the barbell back squat isn't the most natural thing for a human body to do, but the muscles it works in general. Because I like when training is centered around like our human tendencies or our natural inclinations and strengths. I mentioned this to you before. One of my objections with the overhead press is that we humans, we have so small muscles around that region. We have so little muscle mass, so it's not like really one of our human fortes. But the squat is something that humans are pretty good at comparatively, because out of our top 3 biggest muscle groups, and maybe more in the top, the quads, the adductors, and the glutes, all of those are found in the lower body and trained and used very well in the squat. The squat like mainly works those muscle groups. So the squat isn't only an excellent exercise for those muscles, but it's also a great exercise for humans, is my point.
I agree.
So yeah, so I like it. So therefore, I think this is an important movement and an important episode.
I know this is almost hippie bullshit, but when I used to squat, it actually felt like I was doing real training.
Yeah.
That's the same feeling I get when I overhead press, which you just chat on. But when I do bench presses, it feels almost too lazy. And
yeah, the lying down doesn't help. Push-ups feel more like training, or dips.
Yeah, or pull-ups feels like real training.
Yeah,
I'm too fat to do pull-ups, so I do lat pull-downs, and that gives me the same feeling. This is too lazy. But don't mind these objections, because all training is good training, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. We will, throughout this podcast, probably have this back and forth that any exercise, any type of equipment that gets the job done, that is stable enough and, that allows you to train properly is good enough. But we do still have a soft spot for some of these classic barbell lifts, which we're going to cover in this series, because they are really good exercises. But as mentioned, if you want to swap the barbell out for something else, do so. Just, I don't know, hide it.
Yeah. And be a bit ashamed.
So, we got a lot to cover. We are going to cover some technique and biomechanics. We are going to cover how to perform the squat in more detail, and we're going to cover the muscles worked in the squat. And just to get everyone on the same page, we're going to do a super quick overview of the lift and then start getting into all the details. So the barbell back squat begins with the barbell in a rack around your chest height. You unrack it from the bar, you take a few steps back, you squat down to your desired depth, which we'll get into, stand back up again, and if you are done with that lift, you walk forward and rack it again. That is what we're talking about here. And to get started a little bit about the depth, the required depth in most competitions, in most powerlifting competitions, or at least the biggest federations, is to have your hip crease, that is the crease that forms between your upper thigh and your lower abdomen. That crease should be below the highest point of your knee. And for most people, that means that their thigh bone is roughly parallel to the floor.
Yeah.
And that is more than 90-degree knee bend. So a lot of people confuse a 90-degree bend in the knee with a parallel thigh bone to the floor. But in reality, that's like 120-degree knee bend, or knee flexion, to use the proper anatomical term.
If you're only going down to a 90-degree bend in your knee, you're doing a half squat.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just if you're sitting in a chair, if you put your knee at 90 degrees, that would require you to basically sit down on something for you to be able to get that deep. So, okay, let's try and go over some of the details and the biomechanics in the squat. And what makes the squat a bit complicated is that it's such a balancing act. And if you change something in one end, for instance, your bar position, it can have a cascade effect on the rest of your body. Or if you change your stance, it might affect what you have to do with the rest of your body to maintain your balance. And the thing that you have to balance is, well, there are two things actually. It is, number one, your body's center of mass, which is for most people around the belly button and obviously further deeper into your abdomen, and the barbell's center of mass. And then the relationship between these two weights is going to determine where your combined center of mass of you and the barbell, where that ends up. So say, for instance, if we take like elite world-class powerlifters, say someone who weighs 80 kilos but squats 300 kilos or something ridiculous, the barbell's weight is much bigger than the person's body weight, so the barbell is mostly going to determine the combined center of mass.
Yeah.
But then if we take a beginner that maybe weighs 100 kilos and is practicing with an empty barbell, or even worse, maybe a wooden stick, a broomstick or a dowel, the body weight of that person is mostly going to determine the center of mass. And this will affect the technique. You can't maintain the same body position if this changes. So even for that 80 kilo person squatting 300 kilos, his or hers, well, it's probably going to be a he, his technique is going to change during the warm-up when he's using a 20 kilo barbell, 60 kilos, 100 kilos, all the way up to that 300 kilos. That is going to shift the lean and, well, maybe some other things. So there are a couple of different ways you can place the bar when you're squatting, if we begin at that end.
Yeah, for a true beginner, it feels almost most natural to put it up on your neck, which is like the only place we don't recommend you put the bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Put it below your neck. And then if you have it just on top of your shoulder, that's a high bar position. If you put it down on your shoulder blades, it's a low bar position. And then you can have it anywhere in between and experiment with those positions.
Yeah, and both of the positions you mentioned are on the back of the body.
Yeah.
But
I thought
there is also the alternative of placing a barbell in front of your body, and we're making it a front squat. And we're not going to talk about that to a very large extent today, but it's it's useful to illustrate some of the differences of what actually happens.
Yeah.
Because when we place the barbell on the front of our body, well, obviously we shift the center of mass forward, and this will make it easier to keep an upright body position when you're squatting. If we place it on the back of our body, we will have to lean more to maintain that balance. Because this, I forgot to mention that, but the combined center of mass of the barbell and the body is gonna have to rest somewhere over the middle of your foot. You can compensate a bit by placing weight towards your toes or your heel, but around the mid of your foot is where you're gonna have to keep this balance point. And otherwise you will fall over. So it's very clear if you are maintaining the center of mass above that point. So if we place the barbell on our back, we're going to lean forward more. But then, like you mentioned, we can place the barbell further up towards our neck or further down on our shoulder blades. And this is going to have the same effect, just on a smaller spectrum.
Yeah.
So higher up, and we can maintain a slightly more upright position, and lower down, and we will have to lean more to accommodate for that barbell. But it will also have one more effect, and that is it will increase the lever arm from the barbell down to our hips. If you place the barbell high up on your back, there's going to be a longer distance down to your hips. And this means one very simple thing, that the hip strength that you have won't allow you to lift as much weight if you place the barbell further away from your hips. So if you bring the barbell closer to your hips, like in the so-called low bar position, that hip strength you have will result in more kilos lifted. Fairly simple math and mechanics.
And that's also a reason why you see a lot of people on the world stage using a low bar technique, because they can lift more weight that way.
Exactly.
There are exceptions.
There are exceptions, and this isn't the only thing that's going to matter. But it's one big factor in how you solve this puzzle of getting all your limbs together under the barbell and over the middle of your foot.
It's almost like an origami more than a puzzle.
Yeah, or at least it's like, you have to sum up all the parts to solve an equation.
And you have to fold your body like a swan.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to get into that. But just before we leave the bar position in this section, my best practice recommendation is to just find some comfortable-ish place on your back, somewhere between your neck and your shoulder blades, where it feels fairly comfortable. But like most beginners probably have experienced, it hurts the first few times you place a barbell on your back.
It sure does. It hurts even if you've been away from the squat for a few months.
And this, if you're a beginner, might make you glance towards that pad, the cylindrical pad that you can place around the barbell. But don't use that for this exercise. Hold out for a few sessions and the pain will go away. And you will not have to expose yourself to that instability of that soft pad.
Exactly.
You don't want that between yourself and the barbell.
This is not about being macho. This is about you're adding instability. And
precisely.
The barbell, if it sits on your back, it's going to be more stable than if it sits on a bar pad that adds like an inch of fabric or something between you and the barbell.
Yep.
So
don't be macho here. Be macho regarding your doctor instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I hate surgeries, okay?
Yeah, they're a mess. Especially when you do them on yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's an alternative.
Before we leave this top position in the technique, we need to quickly cover the grip. My recommendation is to grip the barbell just outside your shoulders and have the aim that your shoulders should support the barbell and carry the weight, not your hands. They're just there for some stabilization.
Yeah, and you can experiment with having your thumbs around the barbell or on the same side as your other digits. If you place the barbell sort of correctly and don't have all the weight of the barbell in your hand, it shouldn't be an issue with you losing the grip during the squat. But a lot of older people that get started in the gym, they also want to experience with how wide they hold the grip because they are stiff in their shoulders and stuff like that. And it's almost always easier to have a higher bar position if you're stiff in your shoulders and a slightly wider grip than shoulder width.
A higher bar position will, based on what we mentioned earlier, also help more people get down lower, similar to having the weight in front of you.
Yeah.
So it's like a small nudge towards helping you get down deep, which we're going to get into in detail. But yeah, if you're too stiff, then widen the grip, obviously. And your grip, you're gonna have to support the weight more in a low bar position, because otherwise the bar might be able to roll down your back. But in the high bar position, where it almost rests on top of your shoulders, they should only be there to like keep it from start rolling away. There are even clips of people doing no hand squats or they put their hands in their pockets and do a back squat with the barbell high up on their back.
Yeah, that's being macho in the gym.
Yeah, that's macho again.
No, but and your elbows shouldn't be in front of your body, because then you're gonna need to grip the barbell in an awkward position. Have your elbows to the side or slightly behind your body.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to one of the other big determinants of how your squat is going to look, and that is your stance, how wide you place your feet. And that is basically the alternatives we have, or the end points of the continuum. You could stand all the way close with your feet together so that they touch each other, or spread them out all the way and point your toes in 180 degrees different angles. And to get started with the toes, the general recommendation is to point your toes in the same direction that your knee travels. Yeah. So wider stance means that you point your toes more out. More narrow stance means you point them more forward. But then there is individual variation in this and how our feet and our knee joints look, and not all people can squat in that way. Some people, predominantly women, have their feet more rotated outwards compared to their knees than at least men in general do. But there's a huge individual variation in this.
That's the key word. So don't listen to anyone who says that it must look in a very specific way, or else you're doing it wrong.
And it goes for the entire squat, because I mean, we have everything from, our ankles, knees, hips, backs, shoulders. All of this comes together to produce your squat pattern. So it's very unlikely that you will be able to identically mimic someone else's squat unless you really look the same, both like from the outside and on the inside. So because all of this is going to matter. And then we have factors like how long is your torso, how long are your thighs, how long are your lower legs, and so on. But so stance. Typically, you are more, if you change nothing else, you are able to be more upright with a wide stance than a narrow stance. More upright with a wide stance than a narrow stance. Because if all you do is place your feet narrow and you want to equally distribute the movement in your knees and in your hips, that is going to require you to fold over almost like an accordion.
Yeah.
Now some people might object that they see people doing narrow stance squats and being very upright, but then they are not equally distributing the work between their knees and their hips. They are shoving their knees forward and placing almost all that work on their quadriceps. They are not equally distributing the workload between the hips and the knees. But if you take a wide stance, if you are flexible enough, you can pretty much squat down completely vertical and up again. Just to take like the extreme examples. And once again, if we're going to get into best practices, somewhere between a medium to a wide stance is probably going to feel the best for most people. Me personally, I feel better in a slightly narrower stance with my toes forward, but the more common stance seems to be slightly wider than that, with a 30-degree outward pointing of their toes, something like that. And like shoulder width apart with the feet or slightly wider.
Yeah, that's where I always landed. I experimented a lot. I tried having like a super wide stance, almost like a sumo deadlift stance, and that did absolutely not work for me. I know it works for some. But slightly outside shoulder width seems to be a good place to start experimenting. But once again, all lifts are gonna force you to find your individual preferences, but none more so than the squat.
Yeah. And because all of this kind of ties together, let's go on to how you decide to lean your torso. Because as mentioned, if you decide to push your knees forward in the squatting movement and keep your hip close to your feet from a vertical perspective, then you're going to be able to have a more upright torso and you're going to shift more work to your quads. If you do the opposite and you push your butt back and you kind of try to keep your knees above your feet instead, then you're going to lean forward a lot and you're going to place more work on your hips or lower back. And for most people, you're not really going to have to think about this, because if you start squatting, your body is going to feel where it is strong and where it's weak and adjust this ratio of how much weight to put on the quads and how much weight to put on your hips and lower back. So that is it. It will sort itself out if you allow it, but then if you want to, you can consciously shift this. For instance, a bodybuilder who really want to target their quadriceps might decide to push the knees forward. But I'm just mentioning it to maybe help clarify this balancing act that goes on in the squat. But for someone like a powerlifter who just want to squat as much weight as possible, that is going to be your like metric of success. Can I lift more using this style? Then that is the efficient style. And that is it's going to be utilizing your quadriceps and your hip extensors to their biggest extent.
Yeah.
If you're a person with strong quads relative to the hips, then you're going to shift more load towards them and vice versa.
And if you're over 40 or even 50, you're going to try to squat in a way that hurts the least.
Yeah. And for like putting it together and in a recommendation for someone who is new to squatting, typically a slightly higher bar position is going to make it easier to get down, and typically a slightly wider stance is going to make it easier to get down deep. But then it's going to depend on your hip joint structure and other factors, but that is generally good things to start looking at. But if you're a bit more experienced squatting and you want to maximize the weight you can lift, you will want to try lowering the barbell, getting it closer to your hips so that you decrease that lever arm, because that means that your hip strength is going to be able to lift more weight and they can take more of the work from the quadriceps, which are usually a limiting factor in the squat. Yeah. So if you can shift more work from the quads to the hips, then you're probably going to be able to squat more weight. And as mentioned, if you want to build your quads, shift the work forward or shift your knees forward. And if you want to build your ass, you shift your hips back instead and put all the work on that section. So that's basically it. And I know that this might have sounded really complicated. Nothing more I can do about that, really. No, but we will get back to it.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you just go and aim to perform rather deep, controlled squats, you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
And allow yourself to experiment a bit. Experiment with the bar position, your hand position, your stance. Keep on adding sets of good squats and your body will figure it out.
Yeah. And also we should mention again the factor of broomsticks when learning the squat.
They suck.
And there are personal trainers who like video their beginner clients from the sides, having them or trying to have them track this broomstick in a perfectly vertical line above their feet. So basically what they're asking is that they should move it as if it was a barbell weighing several times their body weight. They're completely disregarding the fact that their ass has a weight.
Weird.
Yeah. No. So just like for some people, it's easier to do a deep squat if they hold a light weight in their hands. In the same pattern, it's sometimes easier to do a deep proper squat with some weight on the barbell because it gives you a counterweight for moving down. So don't get stuck in broomstick land try beginning with a barbell, maybe even adding some weight to that. Our recommendation is always that you should start very light and as you learn the movement, but because it affects your balance in the squat, you might need to add a little bit of weight to it.
In defense of the broomstick, not in defense of the personal trainers who does this, the personal trainer might stand next to the client and say, no, that didn't look good, you have to do it again. But if you can squat deep with a broomstick, you can squat deep with a barbell.
Yeah, absolutely.
I often see people that are like, no, I can't go below 90 degrees in my knees, a half squat, as we said earlier. But when they do it with a broomstick, they can go ass to grass.
Yeah, so that is the danger of adding too much weight too soon.
Yeah,
that you...
it's just your subconscious stopping you from going below what you can handle.
Exactly.
In most cases. So
exactly.
Pick off weight from the barbell and start with an empty barbell and start doing full squats and you'll be fine.
Yep. Okay, so should we go over the lift in some more detail?
Let's do it. A common mistake is to place the barbell too high in the rack. Almost like
before you've even unracked it.
Like in chin height or even nose height. And then you need to stand on your tippy toes to even unrack it. And it's going to be really hard to re-rack a heavy weight. So don't do that. Have it at like upper chest height or something.
Yeah, around your sternum is good. Like even for me who uses a high bar position, sternum height is well, it feels good.
Yeah.
So for someone who's squatting with a low bar position, you can have it even slightly lower. But if you go too low, if you place it too low in the barbell, it's going to make unracking and re-racking the barbell awkward. And you're going to waste slightly more energy doing it. But it gets more tricky to actually hit the hooks when you are re-racking the barbell.
Yeah. So you have racked, you have the barbell at the correct height. Now comes the most important step, especially if you're in a crowded gym. Go up to the barbell, rattle it around, scream a bit. Look with an empty barbell. Look completely ridiculous.
Yeah. Call your doctor.
Stop it. No. Take the grip that you're gonna have when walking out. And then get under the barbell, place it on the correct spot on your back. Tense your body and unrack it with a small motion. Don't be uncontrolled.
And like you mentioned, when you are going to unrack it, you walk towards the barbell so that you can feel it against your sternum while you set your grip and then you duck under it. Yeah. And then what you're going to do is that you're going to back out of it so that the rack is in front of you. And this makes the unracking more awkward because you have to back with a heavy barbell, but it makes the re-racking when you are tired much easier. So that you can move towards the rack, actually see the hooks and aim the barbell into them. So do the tricky part when you are fresh before the set and save like the easy work for when you are tired and maybe you're dizzy.
I'm not fully up to speed with how human evolution is going, but I don't think we have eyes in our back yet.
Yeah, not yet. Eyes is an interesting phenomena of evolution.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Daniel.
Maybe if we start walking out our barbells towards the front, we'll start to see some movement in that direction.
And when you walk back with the barbell, take just a few steps. Like aim for one step with your first foot, another step with your second foot, and then a third step just to align your feet correctly.
Exactly.
So don't go on a walk backwards.
Precisely. Some suboptimal racks might force you to take more steps, but ideally you take a 1, 2, and adjust. Yeah. So left, right, adjust. Or the other way. Okay, so now you have found your position. You've set your feet at your preferred stance, so it's time to do the descent or the eccentric portion of the lift. So what you're going to do now is probably to take a new breath. So you exhale a bit of that air you took before you unracked it, and then you take a fairly deep breath of air. I don't know, like 70 to 80% or something of your capacity. Yeah. And then you do a controlled descent down. And there are a myriad of cues for this and that, how you want to squat down, but the gist is to get deeper. And then you can solve that however you want. Just start practicing with a lightweight and you will start to find your groove.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like to imagine that they are leading with their hips first, like breaking in their hips before they break in their knees, and that feels good for a lot of people. But really, that is not within the scope of today's episode. So for today, just squat deep in a controlled fashion. And the recommended squat depth is to at least reach parallel with your thigh bones. Yeah. And why is that?
I don't think it's good enough, I just want to say.
You think you should go deeper?
Yeah, I especially if you're a beginner, aim to go a bit deeper than parallel. But there's many factors. You might start feeling more pain in your knees or your hip, exactly, or stuff like that. Or you might be a bigger person where your body gets in the way.
Yeah.
So, of course, but if you can go to parallel, that's fine. And you get a better training effect. We know this from almost all movements in the gym, that when you have a longer range of motion, you get more training done.
Precisely. So that is one of the factors. And the other one, which we harped a bit about in the bench press episode, is to have some form of standard for yourself so that you know that, okay, this is a squat. I used this weight for this many reps and I know I lifted it to this depth.
Yeah.
So the next time you get in the gym and you increase the weight, you know what standard you need to hold yourself to. And squatting down, breaking parallel, so to say, is a very simple standard to hold yourself to. But absolutely, I don't want to gatekeep either. And if you can't solve this challenge, then find something else. You might place like a bench or a box or something that you just touch your cheeks to when you squat, and that is your signal or your standard, which you aim for. Also works fine. But the training effect is generally better the deeper you go, even if that forces you to use a much lighter weight. There are some like extreme studies where people train with 4 times the weight that the deep squat group does in quarter squats, and the deep squat uses a fourth of that and still gets a better training effect. So in that sense, the exercise might get safer from squatting deeper because you don't need as much weight because it's much harder to do a deep squat. We're going to return to depth, but for now, let's continue with performing the lift. So you've reached your desired depth. For some, it's ass to the grass, the absolute bottom. For some, you have something you squat down to as your single, and for some, you just know when you are at parallel. And then comes the turn, or going back up again. How do you think one should do that part?
Take a 10 to 15 second pause.
Yeah, that is the general way to do it.
No, but especially when the weights are lighter, and I don't mean that they feel light for the beginner, but you see a lot of like hard bouncing in the bottom. And I think that takes away a bit of the training effect. You can bounce a bit, but don't overdo it. Once again, the key word is control. If you look back at the video you shot of yourself doing the squats, which you should do quite often, just to form check, give yourself some feedback, it should look like you have control over the barbell, both on the way down and on the way up.
Yeah, precisely. Oftentimes in sports, if it looks beautiful, it's good.
Yeah.
so aim for that. And yeah, there's a lot of nuance to pausing or just returning immediately up. For a beginner, I can definitely see some benefit of doing at least a few of your reps paused, maybe during your warm-up or during your first few sessions. For one, it's a great way to increase your squat mobility. And number two, it makes it easier for you to like feel that position, like which is my depth, or how does parallel feel. So stay around in that section a bit. But later on, when you're actually training the squat with challenging weight, the general way to perform it is not to do a pause, but to turn immediately with a more or less pronounced bounce.
Yeah.
That's going to vary. If you look at powerlifters, I wouldn't really say that they bounce in the bottom. It's more of a controlled turning movement. But yeah, that's a bit up to you. I mean, from a muscle growth perspective, bouncing is wasted muscle effort, and you're probably better off just feeling that weight in your muscles all the time and eliminating the bounce. If you want to lift heavier, then obviously you want to use this elastic effect to get some speed out of the hole. And if your goal is a bit in between, well, do something in between.
Yeah. But never, ever post a video of you squatting and saying that you're doing paused squat, and then you can't even see the pause. Because that, I will find you. I will hunt you down.
And make them squat.
I have a particular set of skills.
All right. After the turning comes the ascent, or the concentric portion.
Yeah.
And, well, this goes for most exercises, but you will want to push hard. It will make you stronger and give you a better training effect. And you might want to grunt or exhale to create more tension in your abdomen.
That's a good practice.
You don't have to scream,
no.
Lightweight baby, but some grunting or exhaling is useful in general. Gonna depend a bit on if you're doing a 20 rep set or a 1 rep set.
Absolutely. I still think it's perfectly fine to gel out lightweight baby.
Every rep for a 20 rep set.
It's gonna make you real popular.
And gelling isn't really, like, it's probably less effective than grunting.
I think so too.
Because you need to relax a bit more to be able to yell.
I usually started breathing out, squeezing the air out between my teeth when I was like halfway up. Yeah. I needed that extra boost.
Precisely. Like we mentioned in the bench press episode, it will help you contract your core. Yeah. And I mean, generally you want to contract a lot of stuff when you're lifting because it irradiates and helps the working muscle with stability.
And just like in the bench press episode, we talked about this being like trying to learn how to drive a car. There's a lot of stuff to think about in the beginning, but if you just keep doing it, you're not even going to think about breathing. You're not going to think about contracting your core or how you start the squat. If you break in your hips first, everything is just going to be natural for you. So just keep adding sets.
Yeah, gather those reps and sets. I mean, focus on depth, I suppose, and before the lift starts, you can focus on your stance. Yeah. And those are going to be like your big points starting out. And allow you to do micro experiments with your stance between your sets.
But we haven't re-racked the barbell yet in this exercise.
Yeah, that's true. So if you are done, if you're not going to do any more reps, you walk towards the rack, and when you hit the rack, you do a mini squat, placing it into the hooks.
And if you're a bit insecure, double check that the barbell is actually in the hooks. Yeah. Because just like in the bench press, this is when stupid stuff tends to happen.
Yeah, you might have missed the hooks, or like I did once, I placed it on the edge of the hook.
I'm still impressed by that, though.
Yeah, and the buddy saw it and told me not to let go of the barbell.
Yeah. Good buddy.
Yeah. Okay, so that was performing the squat in a fairly good amount of detail. We are going to return to this in future episodes, but that's going to have to do for now. Now let's instead talk a bit more about the muscles worked in the squat, because as we mentioned in the beginning, it's a great exercise for training some of our biggest muscles. And the main muscles we are working in the squat is what we kind of group and call the knee extensors and the hip or lower back extensors. So the knee extensors are simple. Those are your quadriceps, the four-headed big thigh muscle that sits on the front and slightly towards the outside of your thighs. Biggest muscle group in the human body for most people. For me, my biceps is probably bigger. And then we have the hip or back extensors. This is a more complicated group. Yeah. We have the glutes, which is one of our most important hip extensors. We have the adductors, which are also very important hip extensors, especially in the very deep position. someone might know that the hamstring is a hip extensor, but it's more so a knee flexor. So therefore, the hamstrings are generally fairly relaxed in the squat, and studies show that the muscle activity is low, and the hamstrings also doesn't grow from a squat training program. And I know that a lot of starting strength coaches are furious right now, but I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, so what you gonna do?
Yeah, if you want to perform the squat like a good morning, maybe.
Maybe, but if you have absolutely no load on your quadriceps.
Yeah, but that muscle soreness you feel the day after heavy and deep squats are not in your hamstrings. It's in your, what I like to call the toilet muscle, the adductors.
Yeah, probably.
Makes it hard to even sit down on the toilet after really heavy squats.
Yeah. And I mean, and like an exception might be beginners, because we see in muscle activity studies on beginners that they tense more muscles than necessary. So for example, in a bicep curl, a beginner might tense their triceps because they can't really control the movement yet. So a beginner might tense more muscles in the squat than necessary, and then as they refine the movement, they are shaving off all the unnecessarities and keeping and intensifying what the actual prime movers in the movement. And just the last part of the hip or low back extensor muscle group would be the lower spinal erectors, which technically doesn't extend your hip, but they are necessary to keep your hip and your spine in their, or maintain their position. So they are also going to have to be strong, and they get strengthened from the squat. So these are like the big main muscles we work when we are squatting. Then we have a bit of like core work, especially the posterior part, not so much the front of our core. That's used in the opposite type of movement when you are trying to flex our spine. In the squat, we're trying to extend our spine against the back.
You are really aiming to be hated by a lot of people online, Daniel.
No, I'm just tired.
There's quite a few. There's a big population of online fitness influencers claiming the squat to be a great ab exercise, which is not.
And 10 years ago, I probably claimed that as well. So I'm sorry, internet. And then a bit forgotten, but we also do have an extension of our ankles in the squat. It's going to depend a ton on your stance and how you distribute the movement and the work in the squat. But say for someone doing a very upright weightlifter type of squat where their knee goes way forward in the movement, there's probably a decent amount of calf work in there as well. But on the other hand, you might have more of a low bar powerlifting style squat where your lower leg basically doesn't move at all. So that is not going to have a lot of calf work. But whether or not any of these result in any growth isn't really studied yet. And I don't know. I don't think it's a ton. But who knows?
Who knows?
So if we're going to zoom in a bit on these muscle groups, and we begin with the quads, as far as I know, there are at least 2 studies comparing different squat depths and how the quadriceps grows from it. One of them, the first one, the oldest one, compared squats where the participants only bent their knee to 60 degrees. So that's like a quarter squat, a very shallow squat.
A very shameful squat.
Yeah, I would have been embarrassed if I were in that group. I'm not going to do it. It's against my principles. And the other group in that study squatted to 120 degrees. And this is often like a parallel squat. Your thigh bone is parallel to the ground. And a nice squat depth. And then in this study, they found that the quadriceps grew better from the deep squats. So that group saw better quad gains by quite a large degree, I should mention. And this was, I think, all we had on the squat for quite some time until another study compared a 90-degree squat, which would be a half squat for most people, to a 140-degree squat. And now we're talking deep squat territory here. So half squat compared to a deep squat. And they saw similar quadriceps growth. There was no difference between these two groups, which annoys me a bit.
That pisses me off.
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
But it is what it is.
The first study doesn't need to be replicated. The second one does.
The second is very suspicious. No, so I actually don't recall what we've seen in like leg extension studies and the like. We're gonna have to return to that. But as far as squatting goes, it seems that if you at least reach 90-degree knee flexion, your quadriceps is gonna grow pretty nicely. It might differ in different regions of your quadriceps depending on where you measure, because in the first one they measured at like 10 different positions in the quadriceps, and they saw more growth towards the knee region of the quadriceps from the deeper squats compared to the quarter squats.
But you're not only training the squat to train the quads, most likely. You care about your butt too.
Yeah, and in that second one that compared a 90-degree squat to a 140-degree squat, they found that the glutes and the adductors grew twice or thrice as much. Do you say thrice? I think you do. I just did. Yeah. From deep squatting than half squatting. So even if the quad growth was the same, the glutes and adductors doubled or more in terms of growth from the squatting program.
And that's the important takeaway here.
Exactly. I am rectified.
Because when we squat, we want to... I mean, the squat, just like the deadlift, the bench press, it's a lot of bang for your bucks if you do it correctly. And
precisely.
And not just, I can squat, I can do half squats and get the same quad growth. But you're going to lose out on the adductor growth and the glute growth.
Yeah, and these are very important, very large muscles in our bodies.
Yeah.
So don't skip them. And also you have other factors like if you care about being able to perform athletically, deeper squats are going to make you stronger in a wider range of movements and probably going to help your sprinting and jumping slightly more than just doing shallow squats.
And when you're doing deep squat, you have a natural standard for you to find each time you perform the lift. When you're doing like quarter squats or half squats, you always need to make sure that you don't go below that because you haven't trained that depth. And if you have more weight than you can handle, if you accidentally go deeper, you're in deep shit.
Yeah, you're in trouble. So the best way to handle this for someone is to find a natural turning position or a natural bottom position, which you just like automatically hit every rep.
Yeah.
So that you always hit that turning point. And hopefully you can find something that is around parallel or lower than parallel when you're turning. I basically go ass to grass when I squat.
You're more like 160-degree knee flexion.
Probably something like that. And as mentioned, I'm not very strong for my body weight, but it's probably a good stimulative way to perform the exercise. Maybe, allegedly.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually that study we mentioned comparing 90 to 140-degree squats, they did also check the muscle growth in the hamstrings, and it was zilch.
0
in both of the groups. Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Well, who knows, man. So yeah,
that was that.
We do have some finishing touches
let's do
on
it.
how anyone actually would go about training the squat. And one way is to follow my lead and do the squat samba until you reach glory.
Yeah, 300 kilos.
Yeah. So Squat Samba is one of the many squatting programs in our app Strength Log, and it's one of the premium programs, so you need a subscription. But we do have a bunch of free squatting programs, a beginner squat program. We have a ton of free general strength training programs that include a squat, and we also do have the old school squat routine, which is more of an intermediate to advanced style program, but still free. And then we have another whole bunch of more advanced squat programs in the premium subscription. So an intermediate squat program, advanced squat program, powerlifting programs with like different areas of focus. We have a ton.
Yeah. But if you're just getting started with the squat, like a program, we have our beginner barbell program that's free.
Yeah.
It's in the style of starting strength. That's a great start. You don't need those advanced programs. They will just set you back.
Exactly.
They will slow your gains down. We talked about
Basically, what you want to do is to just start light and do around 3 sets per workout and increase the weight by a tiny amount every time.
yeah, and that will work probably for months, and you'll
Yep.
see great gains both in your technique and on the barbell, and
Yeah.
muscle growth, of course, in your hamstrings and abs.
Yeah. Or not. So we mentioned a bunch of times that we're definitely gonna come back to the squat in future episodes because it is. I don't remember if it is the most or the second most, but I think it's the most studied exercise in sports science. I think it is.
Good scientists.
Yeah. So we're gonna keep covering a lot of science on the squat, but we have already done a few episodes on squatting.
Yeah.
Episode 4 on a study comparing the effects from front squatting versus back squatting. Episode 11 covering common squat mistakes, and episode 34 on a study comparing squats to hip thrusts to see which grew which muscles and how they affected performance.
Yeah, give those episodes a listen if you haven't already, and make sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast, because coming up is the lift we love to hate, or at least I do, the deadlift.
Yeah. Wow. Now when I've been doing my squat focus, I have omitted the deadlift. I haven't trained that for this entire period. I know that I'm definitely going to get back to the deadlift. I'm just not looking forward to like breaking it in again after this time period.
No, because if you think that the squat hurts in the beginning, the deadlift hurts more.
Yeah, and it never stops.
No, never stops. Your chins get bloody, your hands get sore, you have pain all over your body. Why do we deadlift?
Because it definitely feels like training.
Yeah, it does. It passes the eye test. It feels like you're doing real shit.
Giving you a deep sense of accomplishment.
I haven't.
So yeah, next week we're gonna cover the deadlift in a similar amount of detail, but we are gonna be fumbling a bit more in the dark because the deadlift isn't nearly as well studied as the squat is.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there isn't a single study looking into which muscles actually grow when you're deadlifting.
None of them. That's why
all of them.
That's why bodybuilders don't deadlift.
Yeah. Imagine if we get that study and it shows like it works a ton of muscles optimally. All the bodybuilders are going to go crazy.
I wouldn't believe that study, Daniel.
We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's long episode.
Train hard, eat well, die anyway.